All right, so in this lesson, we are going to focus on a character trait called intellectual humility. If I have not done so yet, I will at some point in the course give you some insight into the context and evolution of these concepts from the standpoint of philosophy and in particular the branch of epistemology. But for right now, let's just focus on this specific topic. We know that we have a specific topic because of course we see what shape, the triangle, and we know that the triangle is used to highlight a concept of note. So let's go ahead and start. Well, actually, go ahead and in this part right here, put your first and last name, and then I want you to write, the name of the course. So is it Philosophy 2306 or Philosophy 1301? Okay, and then just put the POL for Professor's Online Lesson, and then whatever number we've assigned to it. So if it's POL 2 in the syllabus, you'll put POL 2. Okay, so thank you for doing that. Now let's go ahead and develop this triangle. So the sign that we are going to be working with is intellectual humility. Make sure that in constructing this triangle that all of the relevant parts of the triangle, of the concept, are in their appropriate space. Remember, formatting matters a lot when it comes to our notes and what we are portraying. So make sure that this sign over here, it's a two-word sign, does not go past the halfway point of the base of this triangle. So what do we call this part right here of a concept? The definition. Notice, I'm just going to be iterating a little bit, that, we don't label, we don't say definition, we don't say sign when we're actually constructing a triangle, a concept triangle. We don't label the parts when we're actually presenting a concept diagram. Okay, so intellectual humility is being conscious of and readily admitting the limits of one's own knowledge. Okay, so notice the word own right here. So it's very inward focused, it's inner focused. It's something about you and your attitude and your stance about how much you know and your willingness to admit that there's limits, right? So notice the word limits right there. So let's underline this. Let's underline own, and then of course knowledge. Now, remember, knowledge is a core concept for epistemology, but we're not going to focus on that right now, okay? So you get the general idea there, and then we're going to write out an example, and the example of course goes down here, so make sure it's over here at this corner. Make sure it doesn't start over here. Your example should not be up in this space. It should be really, I should see that you really tried to put it very close to this corner in this space. So the example we're going to do is Coach C telling the class, and we quote, "I know a lot about philosophy, but now the part that I want you to finish writing out is don't know much about physics." So go ahead and fill in those missing words. You can pause the video, rewind me, whatever it is that you need to do. Okay, so this part of the example where I say I know a lot about philosophy, that's not an example of it's not an example of intellectual humility, but it's also not an anti-example. So one of the things that I will be stressing in class is that intellectual humility doesn't mean you claim to know nothing, right? That's not what it's about, and we'll get more into that in class. The part that really counts in the example is that, or that really showcases the intellectual humility here, is that one can full well be aware that one knows a lot about something, but one should be ready to admit that one doesn't know at least something about everything, right? So the core of the example is where in the quote, we have me saying, I don't know much about physics. All right, so that's the basic concept triangle for this intellectual virtue. Again, intellectual humility falls under the broader concept of intellectual virtue, where an intellectual virtue is a character trait of good thinkers, learners, and communicators. And we're going to be, I'll go over that part, what I just said, the broader concept of intellectual virtue soon enough. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to shed light on the definition at this point. But what I want you to write up here is draw an arrow, and we're going to write like a little note about this definition. And what I want you to write is that this is the official definition. Now, notice I don't have it down here. I'm not saying official definition : right? Because I said we don't label the parts of a what the part is that we're filling in, right? So we put in the information, but then we're not labeling it and saying definition. But we're drawing away from the definition just to say, oh, by the way, this is the official definition, and I'm doing that so that you can make sure, if needed in the future, and I say use the official definition, that you know where to go. I don't want you to think that this is the official definition, right? What this is elaboration and then significance. So we're going to shed light on the definition, and then I'm going to shed light, even more light, on this concept in a later lesson, whether it be in class or online. All right, so now we are going to do what is called elaboration. So when we're elaborating, what we're doing is we are shedding light on the, and then what I want you to write here is concepts, definition, and then close the parentheses, okay? So this is to help you understand in part, increase your understanding in part of what intellectual humility, the concept, is about. All right, so we're going to draw a happy face because the idea is that it's a good thing to reflect intellectual humility, okay? And notice how I have some bullet points here in I statements. So as we go through the I statements, I want you to really internalize that. I want you to read the I, and I want you to reflect, introspect, and think about the extent to which these claims are true of you. Are these claims more true of you in some context, about some topics more than others? Think about it. All right, so if you are intellectually humble and you're willing, you're conscious of, and readily admit the limits of your knowledge, then you are someone who would say, I am aware that I have at least a little ignorance about everything. Okay? About any topic, any discipline, any subject. No one knows it all, though of course you probably know somebody who thinks they are a know-it-all. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but that is a term, and I used to be a know-it-all. No matter what question was given to me, no matter what topic was at hand, even if I'd never thought about the question, even if I'd never thought about the topic, I would just give an answer as if I knew. I had to make something up. I have no idea why I was like that in the early 90s, but I'm not like that anymore. It's kind of weird. All right, so now notice that I used the word ignorant. Some of you might be like, that's kind of cringe, right? I mean, are you calling me ignorant? And I am the first to say, hey, I am a learned ignoramus. Yes, all of your professors are learned ignoramuses. And it's nothing to be ashamed about. We're all ignorant about something. So the definition of ignorance that I am working with should not be connected to some of the ways that we might use the term outside of this definition. Often when people hear or use the word ignorant, they use it in a very negative way. Sometimes people use it to talk down about people or to criticize who they are as persons and whatnot. But what I want to make clear is how we'll be using that word. So I want to do some conceptual clarification, but we're not going to create a concept diagram. We're just going to do the term and the gist of what I mean by that. So let's draw a text box. I often do text boxes when I'm adding additional information to shed light on something that I'm shedding light on. So here I want you to write the word ignorant or ignorance. Let's do ignorance. Okay, put it in quotation marks. And I want you to write that when we have ignorance, we're just saying that Basically, we notice that we have, or it is, let's write it that way, it is that of which I am unaware. Okay. Ignorance is simply the stuff that you don't know, that you're unaware of, that you're unaware of. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the next bullet point. But it's interesting to think about this. Would you be willing to say, oh yeah, I'm ignorant of that, at least a little bit ignorant of that. I'm very ignorant of that, okay? So next, think about this claim. I have some insight in what? In how I have come to form a strongly held belief about some particular thing. Okay. You might have some very strong beliefs, strongly held them. You believe them with all your heart. You truly, deeply believe them. Do you have any insight in how you came to form them? What are the limitations of how you came to form that belief? Okay. I acknowledge that there might be problems, okay, with a claim that is a claim that comes from you that I know some particular thing. Okay, so continuing on. Again, we're thinking about these I statements and the extent to which we reflect intellectual humility. We are doing an elaboration to shed light on the definition. So remember, these are not the definition, right? These are not going to count as examples. They are shedding light into the definition. I remain open to the idea that I can learn from a variety of sources across a variety of contexts. So if you're intellectually humble, then it could be that you're thinking, well, I already know what it means to be humble. But if you have intellectual humility, you would say, I have learned about humility. I learned about that from my parents, and I learned about that from church and the Bible, and I know that being humble is very important. But I'm sure there's been lots of thoughts and thinking and conversations about humility that I've never thought about. And I've never thought about intellectual humility before. I've just thought about being humble in general. So maybe I can learn something from this lesson in terms of a different kind of humility, or from the standpoint of philosophy, or even just what this particular professor has to say. Okay, so I would be a source. And then the context would be a class that you're taking. Okay, so again, be thinking about how and whether and to the extent you reflect these aspects of being intellectually humble. Remember, we're just shedding light on the definition. They do not count as examples, but modalities inherent in the official definition. Now here we get significance, okay? And the significance that we are going to tease out is going to be kind of the downside. So that's why we're going to do this kind of meh emoji. And what I want you to write here is we're going to talk about significance when IH, and of course IH refers to what? Intellectual humility is lacking or insufficient. Do you guys know what insufficient means? It's the opposite of sufficient. So of course, insufficient means not enough of something for something else to be the case. So let's go through these I statements and think about the extent to which, this might be true of you in some way. So the idea here is that the significance of lacking intellectual humility, or having insufficient, not enough, being too limited in that which makes one intellectually humble, is that, and I'm going to use the statement, is that I might develop a false sense of, and what I want you to write here is knowledge about something or someone without it. And with the it, what am I referring to? I mean intellectual humility. So draw a little arrow up and then write IH right here. And remember, you can pause this video. What else? If I am lacking IH or it's insufficient in some context or domain of my experience, well then I cannot fairly judge something or someone. And then here I meant to have the word I. When I am in a state of ignorance about that someone's thinking, point of view. So when I say thinking or point of view, we can also think about, logic, thoughts, take, frame of reference, things of that nature, point of view. Okay. What else? Something could be something like a document, like the Constitution, something like that. Of course, humans put that together. I guess documents, though, don't have they do have a point of view. Not a point of view organic to the document itself, of course. It's an inanimate thing, but in terms of the brains and minds that put that document together. Without IH, or if it's lacking, insufficient, or too limited, I might even distort or misrepresent that of which I am willfully ignorant. Okay, so it's very important to keep this in mind. Being intellectual humility is actually very helpful to us, not only as human beings in general, right? But in particular, being a college student and taking classes and being open-minded, open to the idea that there's going to be some things that you don't know, and you might get something useful or beneficial out of a given class. I think that's going to be the last point that I make about that.